2 years ago, in a crowded ballroom, a young entrepreneur handed his business card to a powerful CEO. The room erupted in laughter. The CEO had crushed him with nothing but arrogance. Everyone thought his career was over. But what they didn't know was that humiliation would fuel the greatest comeback they had ever seen. And when they met again, the laughter didn't just stop, it turned into silence. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss more powerful stories of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph. I pray that everyone who subscribes will always find the strength to rise after being underestimated, and may success come your way when others least expect it. The alarm rang at 5 a.m., a faint buzz that seemed almost embarrassed to wake him. Daniel reached across the small nightstand and silenced it with a groggy hand. For a moment, he lay still, staring at the cracked ceiling of his one-bedroom apartment. The plaster was flaking again. He made a mental note to tape it up before it fell onto his desk, a desk piled high with notebooks, resumes, and business magazines borrowed from the library. He sat up slowly, rubbed his eyes, and whispered to himself, "Another day closer." Daniel Parker wasn't wealthy. He didn't come from a family of connections. His father had been a mechanic until arthritis bent his hands into claws that could no longer grip a wrench, and his mother worked double shifts at a diner, pouring coffee for customers who barely noticed her. They hadn't had the luxury to give him anything more than their belief. But that belief had become Daniel's fuel. He dressed in the same gray suit he always wore to interviews and networking events. It wasn't tailored or expensive, just a clearance rack find from 3 years ago. The sleeves were a little short, the fabric worn thin around the cuffs. But he kept it spotless and pressed, convincing himself that confidence would shine brighter than fabric. On the narrow table by the window, stacks of white cardstock were neatly arranged. He had stayed up until midnight the night before, trimming and designing his own business cards. Nothing fancy, just his name, a phone number, an email address, and one bold line beneath. Daniel Parker, marketing strategist. He had debated that line for weeks. Was it too presumptuous? After all, he wasn't officially a strategist yet. But he thought like one. He had ideas that could breathe life into struggling companies. He believed in the power of stories to sell, in creating campaigns that connected emotionally, not just logically. And if he didn't call himself that now, who would? Holding one of the freshly cut cards, he smiled. The edges were slightly uneven, betraying the fact that they'd been cut with kitchen scissors. Still, they represented hope. His hope. Daniel's dream hadn't come from nowhere. As a boy, he'd loved watching commercials on TV, not for the products, but for the creativity. While other kids muted the ads, Daniel leaned closer, analyzing why some made him laugh, why some stuck in his head. He remembered one evening when he was 12, sitting cross-legged on the floor, watching a soda commercial where a single sip turned dull gray streets into a carnival of colors. He had clapped his hands in delight. "That's what I want to do," he had told his mother. "I want to make people feel something with words and pictures." His mother had smiled, tired but supportive. "Then make sure you work harder than anyone else, sweetheart. Dreams don't come cheap." Those words had followed him into adulthood. After college, Daniel discovered that the world wasn't waiting with open arms. Every job posting wanted 3 years of experience. Every networking event seemed full of people who already knew each other. He shook hands, handed out resumes, followed up with polite emails, and heard nothing back. Money ran thin. He took odd jobs, delivering groceries, tutoring high school kids in English, freelancing online. But he never let go of his bigger goal. He still attended seminars, free talks at universities, and every networking event he could squeeze into his schedule. It was at one of these free seminars that he first heard the name that would change his life, Richard Caldwell. Caldwell was a titan in the business world, a CEO whose marketing empire stretched across continents. Articles praised him as a visionary, a ruthless strategist, and a man whose handshake could open doors. To Daniel, he was a beacon. If I could just meet him, Daniel thought, just get 30 seconds to pitch myself. The opportunity came one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Daniel had been volunteering at a local business forum, helping set up chairs and passing out pamphlets, when he overheard two organizers whispering about an upcoming gala. "Caldwell himself is going to be there," one said. Daniel's ears perked. He stepped closer, heart hammering. Later, after hours of polite persistence and explaining his passion, one of the organizers handed him a leftover ticket. "You didn't hear it from me," she said, "but maybe you'll make some good connections." Daniel clutched the ticket like a golden key. That night, he stayed awake rehearsing. He practiced his introduction in the mirror. "Hello, Mr. Caldwell, my name is Daniel Parker." He tried different handshakes, different tones of voice. He laid out his suit and polished his scuffed shoes until they gleamed. On the desk, he lined up the stack of cards, trimming the edges again to make them straighter. By midnight, exhaustion tugged at his eyelids, but excitement kept him wired. He thought of his father, who used to say, "One chance is all it takes, son. Just one chance to prove yourself." And tomorrow, Daniel believed, would be that chance. The morning of the gala, the city seemed brighter. Sunlight glinted off skyscraper windows, and the sidewalks buzzed with people in suits and dresses. Daniel walked among them, his worn briefcase clutched tightly, his pockets filled with business cards that felt like ammunition. As he approached the glass tower where the gala was held, he paused to look at his reflection in the doors. His suit might not scream wealth, but his eyes held determination. He straightened his tie, whispered, "You belong here," and stepped inside. The lobby was a sea of elegance: crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, waiters carrying trays of champagne. Conversations hummed around him, full of industry jargon and laughter. Daniel's heart raced, but he squared his shoulders and moved forward. He wasn't here just to watch. He was here to meet destiny. And in that glittering room, surrounded by giants of the business world, Daniel clutched his modest card and believed, with all his heart, that this small piece of paper could change his life. What he didn't know was that it would change his life, but not in the way he imagined. The gala glittered like something out of a dream. Every corner of the grand ballroom pulsed with life, the clinking of champagne flutes, the hum of orchestral music, and the laughter of people who seemed to have already made it. Daniel stepped cautiously onto the polished marble floor, trying not to gape at the towering crystal chandeliers above him or the waiters gliding past with trays of hors d'oeuvres he couldn't pronounce. For a moment he stood by the entrance, adjusting his tie, his palms slick with sweat. He reminded himself of the mantra he'd repeated all morning: "You belong here. Act like it." But as he scanned the room, spotting tailored suits, glittering gowns, and diamonds flashing under the chandelier lights, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was an imposter. His clearance rack suit felt like armor made of paper. Then, across the room, he saw him. Richard Caldwell. The man was exactly as the magazines described: tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair swept back neatly. His presence commanded attention, even though he wasn't loud or flamboyant. He stood among a circle of executives, one hand in his pocket, the other casually holding a glass of champagne as he listened to a story with an amused half-smile. Daniel's heart pounded. That's him. That's the man who could change everything. Daniel lingered at the edge of the crowd, rehearsing silently. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell. My name is Daniel Parker." "No, too stiff." "Try, Mr. Caldwell, it's an honor to meet you. I've followed your career for years." "No, too desperate." He inhaled deeply, wiped his damp hands on his pants, and fingered the edge of one of his homemade business cards in his pocket. The cardstock felt rough under his fingertips, uneven from the scissor cuts. Still, it was his ticket. Minutes passed as he watched others laugh with Caldwell, trading jokes, nodding at stories. Daniel knew he couldn't stand frozen forever. One chance, he thought. Just one. Finally, when Caldwell's circle loosened, Daniel forced his legs to move. Each step felt heavy, but soon he stood within arm's reach of the man whose name carried weight in every boardroom across the country. "Mr. Caldwell," Daniel began, his voice steadier than he expected. "It's an honor to meet you. My name is Daniel Parker." Caldwell turned slightly, his sharp blue eyes glancing at Daniel with a polite but distracted curiosity. "Yes? And what do you do, Mr. Parker?" That was the moment Daniel had prepared for. He straightened his back, drew in a breath, and spoke with all the conviction he could muster. "I'm a marketing strategist, he said firmly. I believe in the power of storytelling to transform brands. I've studied your campaigns for years, especially the Caldwell Global rebrand. You used narrative instead of numbers to win hearts. That inspired me. I've been developing strategies that can help companies not just sell products, but build emotional legacies. For a second, Caldwell's brow rose, as though he hadn't expected such a bold declaration. Encouraged, Daniel pressed on. I may not come from a big firm, but I've worked hard, and I'm ready to bring fresh ideas to the table. If you'd give me even 10 minutes, I could show you how I think differently. And Daniel reached into his pocket with a shaky hand, pulling out one of his cards. Here's my card. He extended it, the little white rectangle trembling between his fingers. Caldwell glanced down at the card. Then he looked closer. The uneven edges, the flimsy paper stock, the plain black font. It was the kind of card no one in that glittering room would ever carry. And then it happened. Caldwell chuckled. At first, it was soft, almost to himself. But as others in his circle leaned closer to see the card, the chuckle grew into a laugh. His deep voice rang out over the hum of conversation. Good God, he said, still laughing. Is this homemade? Daniel's stomach dropped. One of the executives peered at the card and smirked. Looks like something I made in middle school computer class. A woman in a sequined dress covered her mouth, failing to hide her grin. Caldwell shook his head, still holding the card between two fingers as if it were contaminated. Son, let me give you some advice. If you want to play in the big leagues, you can't show up with this. He flicked the card back at Daniel, letting it flutter to the floor like trash. The group burst into laughter. Not cruel, perhaps, but dismissive, the kind of laughter that said you don't belong here. Daniel's cheeks burned. His ears rang with the sound of their laughter, drowning out the music, the chatter, the clinking glasses. Every instinct told him to run, but his feet felt rooted to the floor. He bent down, slowly, to pick up the discarded card. His fingers trembled as he slipped it back into his pocket. Thank you for your time, he whispered, though his throat was tight and dry. He forced himself to look Caldwell in the eye, but the CEO had already turned back to his circle, dismissing Daniel as if he had never existed. The room spun. People were still laughing softly, shaking their heads, returning to their conversations. Daniel turned away, his vision blurred, and began walking toward the exit. Every step felt like a spotlight was on him. He imagined every pair of eyes watching, judging. In his mind, whispers followed him. Who invited him? What a joke. Did you see that card? By the time he pushed through the heavy glass doors and into the cool night air, he could barely breathe. The street outside was quiet compared to the glittering chaos inside. Rain had started again, light droplets tapping against the pavement. Daniel loosened his tie and inhaled sharply, trying to steady his racing heart. He replayed the scene over and over. Caldwell's laugh, the way the card fluttered to the ground, the pitying smirks. His dream moment, destroyed in less than a minute. Pulling out the damp business card, he stared at it under the streetlight. The ink had smudged slightly from his sweaty hands. For the first time, he saw it not as hope but as evidence of failure. A voice inside whispered cruelly, "You don't belong here. You never will." His hand trembled as he nearly crumpled the card into a ball. But he stopped. Instead, he slid it carefully back into his pocket. Maybe tonight had ended in humiliation. Maybe his career was already over in Caldwell's eyes. But deep inside, another voice whispered, faint but defiant, "This isn't the end. Not if you don't let it be." Daniel lifted his gaze to the towering skyscrapers around him. Their lights shimmered through the mist, symbols of the world he still longed to be part of. His humiliation was raw, his heart heavy, but something inside him refused to die. He would not let Richard Caldwell's laughter be the final word. The morning after the gala, Daniel woke with a heaviness pressing against his chest. For a few seconds, before his mind fully reassembled itself, he had forgotten the events of the night. But as sunlight crept through the blinds and the city stirred outside his apartment window, the memory struck him like a blow. The laughter, the flutter of his business card hitting the floor, Caldwell's dismissive smirk. Daniel rolled onto his side, burying his face in the pillow. He wanted to sink into the mattress, to erase himself. But then his phone buzzed. He reached for it with a groan, and the screen lit up with notifications. His stomach knotted. Messages, emails, social media tags. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened one. It was a clip. Someone at the gala had filmed the exchange, Caldwell laughing, holding the card, mocking it for all to see. The video had already spread among industry insiders overnight. Caption read, "When ambition meets reality, know your place." Comments streamed below. Rookie mistake. Who shows up with a card like that? Embarrassing. He'll never work in this city again. Daniel dropped the phone onto the bed, his face burning. The humiliation wasn't confined to one ballroom anymore. It was public. Permanent. He dragged himself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. In the mirror, he saw the dark circles under his eyes, the tightness in his jaw. He barely recognized himself. "Career over," he whispered, the words foreign yet frighteningly real. The days that followed blurred together. Emails he had sent to potential clients weeks before went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. Even friends in his small professional network grew distant, their replies curt or non-existent. The message was clear. Nobody wanted to associate with the guy who had become the punchline at Caldwell's gala. Daniel stopped going out. The world beyond his apartment walls felt hostile, filled with whispers and judgment. He ordered takeout, let dishes pile in the sink, ignored the stack of unopened bills on the counter. At night, he lay awake, replaying every second of that encounter. If only he'd been smoother, sharper, more polished. If only he'd had proper cards, a better suit, a stronger presence. Regret gnawed at him like rust on metal. More than once, he thought about quitting altogether. Finding some safe, anonymous job where nobody cared about ambition or dreams. Just a paycheck, just survival. But then he'd remember his mother's words, "Daniel, you've got fire in you. Don't waste it." And he couldn't bring himself to give up. Not yet. One evening, after another day of silence from the outside world, Daniel sat on his couch surrounded by discarded takeout containers. The TV played muted news in the background, casting flickers of light across the room. He pulled one of his business cards from his wallet, staring at it in the dim glow. The flimsy paper mocked him, reminding him of the laughter, the humiliation. Frustration surged. With a sharp cry, he flung the card across the room. It fluttered weakly before landing face down on the floor. Daniel buried his face in his hands. For the first time, tears spilled freely. He had tried so hard, sacrificed so much, and for what? To be laughed at, discarded, erased? "Maybe they're right," he whispered hoarsely. "Maybe I don't belong." The apartment was silent but for his ragged breathing. And then his phone buzzed again. It was a message. From an unknown number. "Saw what happened at the gala. Brutal. But don't let Caldwell's arrogance define you. He's laughed at a lot of people before they proved him wrong. Keep going." Daniel blinked at the words, reading them again. There was no name attached, just encouragement from someone anonymous. But something about it struck him. Someone believed he still had a chance. Someone out there thought Caldwell's dismissal wasn't the final word. He wiped his eyes and leaned back against the couch. The despair didn't vanish, but for the first time in days, it wasn't absolute. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the message echoing in his mind, "Don't let Caldwell define you." He realized he was at a crossroads. He could let the laughter end him, let it cement his reputation as a failure. Or he could rise, somehow, even if it meant starting from nothing. The decision wasn't sudden, like a switch flipping. It was slow, tentative, fragile. But by dawn he knew, he couldn't give up. He stood by the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The city was waking, bustling, alive with possibility. For the first time in weeks, he felt like maybe he could wake too. He pulled out his notebook, the one he hadn't touched since before the gala. On the first page, he wrote in bold letters, "Prove them wrong." The following days didn't magically improve. Clients didn't come rushing in, nor did friends suddenly return his calls. The humiliation still lingered, and whispers still followed him online. But Daniel began to change. He cleaned his apartment, tossing out trash and scrubbing until the place smelled fresh again. He started running in the mornings, feeling his lungs burn, his muscles ache. The physical exertion reminded him he was alive, still capable. He devoured books on branding, marketing psychology, entrepreneurship. He watched lectures late into the night, filling notebooks with ideas, strategies, dreams. And slowly, a new vision began to form. He wouldn't beg for validation from men like Caldwell. He would build something of his own. Something they couldn't laugh away. One evening, he found himself back at his desk, sketching designs for a new business card. Not flimsy, homemade ones, but bold, professional, memorable. Cards that would one day represent a brand people respected. He paused, staring at the rough sketches. He wasn't ready yet, not even close. But the act of sketching felt like defiance, like planting a flag in the soil of his future. "Laugh all you want," he murmured into the quiet room. "I'm not done." As the night deepened, Daniel taped the original business card, the one Caldwell had mocked, onto the wall above his desk. Not as a reminder of failure, but as fuel. Every time he looked at it, he would remember the humiliation, the sting of rejection. And he would remember the vow he made to himself, to rise from it. Because maybe his career felt over now. But deep down, Daniel knew, his story was only just beginning. The morning light streamed into Daniel's apartment, no longer unwelcome. It had been weeks since the gala disaster, weeks of solitude, reflection, and tiny steps toward rebuilding. For the first time, Daniel didn't wake with dread but with determination. The humiliation still lingered like a scar, but instead of crippling him, it fueled him. He taped a single piece of paper above his desk where he had written his new mantra: "Prove them wrong." And every day he lived by it. Daniel began with structure. He treated his small one-bedroom apartment like an office. Each morning, he dressed as if he were meeting clients, even though no one came. He brewed coffee, sat at his desk, and mapped out a plan. He listed his strengths: storytelling, branding, creativity. Then his weaknesses: resources, connections, credibility. Finally, he listed what he needed to do: build a portfolio, find small clients, create results that spoke louder than any fancy introduction. The first challenge was finding clients willing to take a chance on him. Nobody in the high-powered circles wanted to touch the card guy. But Daniel realized there was another world: small businesses, entrepreneurs just starting, people who didn't need prestige but results. He started cold emailing cafes, boutiques, independent startups. Out of hundreds of emails, he received only a handful of responses. Most politely declined. One cafe owner replied simply, "If you can bring in customers, I don't care about your past. Meet me tomorrow." The cafe was a cozy, struggling spot on the corner of a busy street. Daniel sat with Maria, the owner, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes but a kind smile. "I've poured my life into this place," Maria said, glancing around the half-empty cafe. "But I'm losing money every month. You're my last try. What can you do?" Daniel swallowed hard. This was his chance. He opened his notebook, sketching ideas as he spoke. "You don't need expensive ads," he explained. "What you need is a story. This cafe isn't just a place to drink coffee, it's a place where people connect. We'll highlight the heart behind it. Social media, community events, loyalty cards designed around your story." Maria studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll give you 2 weeks. Show me results." Those 2 weeks were brutal. Daniel worked around the clock, designing posters, managing social media, creating short videos of Maria telling her story. He handed out flyers himself, talking to strangers on the street. By the end of the 2 weeks, the cafe's foot traffic had doubled. Customers lingered longer, sharing their experiences online. Maria's eyes glistened as she looked at the numbers. "You did it. You actually did it." Daniel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time since the gala, he felt not like a failure, but like someone who could make a difference. Word spread. Slowly, quietly, other small businesses began reaching out. An indie bookstore, a fitness coach, a family-owned bakery. Each one trusted him not because of reputation, but because of results. Daniel poured himself into every project. He listened to their stories, crafted campaigns that highlighted authenticity, and watched as his clients flourished. His portfolio grew one success at a time. Yet, even as he climbed, he kept the old business card taped to his wall. Every time he felt tired or discouraged, he looked at it. Every time he felt tempted to rest on a small victory, he remembered Caldwell's laughter. He wasn't rising just for himself anymore. He was rising to prove that mockery didn't define destiny. The road wasn't smooth. Some campaigns failed. One client backed out midway, leaving Daniel unpaid. Another accused him of overpromising. There were nights he sat staring at his bank account, wondering how long he could survive. But instead of breaking him, the setbacks sharpened him. He learned to negotiate contracts properly, to set boundaries, to communicate expectations clearly. Each mistake became a lesson. He started networking again, but this time differently. He didn't chase after the glamorous circles. Instead, he built relationships with other strivers, small entrepreneurs who respected effort over reputation. Together, they formed a network of mutual support, referring clients to one another, sharing lessons and encouragement. Months passed. Daniel's one-man operation slowly transformed into something bigger. He registered a company name, Parker Branding Solutions. He hired a freelance designer to polish visuals, a copywriter to refine campaigns. What began as desperation turned into a real business. He even invested in professional business cards, sleek, heavy cardstock, embossed lettering. The first time he handed one out, his hand trembled. But the recipient didn't laugh. They nodded, impressed, slipping it into their pocket. It wasn't just a card anymore. It was a symbol of how far he had come. One evening, Daniel received an unexpected email. "Mr. Parker, we've been following your work with local businesses. Your campaigns have a unique voice. We'd like to invite you to speak at the Small Business Growth Summit next month." Daniel reread the email 3 times, hardly believing it. A summit? Him, on stage, sharing his story? The day of the summit, he stood backstage, heart pounding. The auditorium buzzed with hundreds of entrepreneurs, investors, and small business owners. When he walked onto the stage, applause greeted him. Not mockery, not dismissal applause. He spoke honestly, sharing his journey, his failures, his lessons. He didn't hide the gala incident. In fact, he told it in detail. "I was laughed at in front of the most powerful man in the industry," Daniel said, his voice steady. "I thought my career was over. But that laughter didn't end me. It began me. Because when you're at the bottom, you learn what you're truly made of. And I promise you, mockery doesn't define you. Results do." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Daniel swallowed hard, humbled and astonished. After the summit, opportunities poured in. Clients reached out from across the country. Journalists requested interviews. For the first time, Daniel wasn't chasing doors. Doors were opening to him. And then came the email that made his heart stop. From Caldwell Global Enterprises. "We would like to invite you to be a guest panelist at our annual leadership conference. Your perspective on storytelling and branding would be a valuable addition." Daniel stared at the message, a mixture of disbelief and vindication washing over him. It wasn't just any conference. It was the conference, the one Caldwell himself presided over. The same stage where his humiliation had begun. Now they wanted him. That night, Daniel stood by his desk, staring at the old business card taped to the wall. He reached up, touched it gently and whispered, "You were the reason I started. But now, you're not the ending." He slid the card into a small box labeled fuel, then replaced it with one of his new cards, sleek, sharp, professional. The contrast made him smile. His story had turned. He was no longer the man who had been laughed at. He was the man who had risen. And soon he would stand face to face with Caldwell again. This time on equal ground. The grand ballroom was ablaze with light and chatter. Crystal chandeliers spilled their golden glow over marble floors, and the sound of champagne glasses clinking filled the air. It was the biggest corporate event of the year, one where business leaders, investors, and innovators mingled freely. Deals worth millions, sometimes billions, were whispered into existence here. At the center of it all was Victor Harrington, the CEO of Titan Global, standing tall with his usual aura of superiority. He had built a reputation not just as a ruthless businessman but also as a man who relished in crushing others. For him, humiliation was a tool, and he had used it time and again to establish dominance. Just a few feet away, Daniel Carter entered the hall with quiet confidence. Unlike the last time he had approached Victor with his card, when he was laughed at and dismissed in front of an audience, this time, Daniel had the weight of something far greater behind him. Daniel's company, Nexitech Innovations, had exploded into relevance in less than 2 years. His groundbreaking renewable energy technology, compact, affordable, and scalable, had been hailed as a revolution. Governments wanted in, investors chased him, and media outlets had crowned him the visionary who came from nowhere. But Daniel wasn't here just to bask in his success. He had a purpose. Tonight was personal. As he scanned the room, he saw familiar faces, executives who once turned him away, venture capitalists who had ignored his pitches, even former colleagues who had mocked him. They were now nodding in acknowledgement, whispering his name with respect. But Daniel's eyes found only one man, Victor Harrington. Victor was surrounded by admirers, laughing as he boasted about Titan's latest acquisition. His booming voice carried across the room. Yet when his gaze accidentally brushed Daniel's, there was a flicker, a brief pause before he masked it with a smirk. "Ah, the prodigal underdog," Victor said loudly, ensuring people around could hear. "Back from the ashes, are we?" Daniel didn't flinch. Instead, he walked toward Victor, calm and steady, just as he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind. "Victor," Daniel greeted, his tone measured but firm. "It's been a while." Victor raised his glass. "Indeed. I see your little startup made some headlines. Congratulations. Though I'm curious, how long before reality catches up?" A few people chuckled, siding instinctively with the powerful CEO. But others remained quiet, sensing something was different this time. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. For a brief moment, whispers rippled through the crowd. Was history about to repeat itself? Was he going to hand Victor another business card only to be mocked again? But instead, Daniel pulled out a sleek black folder. He opened it deliberately, revealing signed contracts, government endorsements, and investment pledges. "These," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the noise, "are partnerships worth more than Titan's last 3 acquisitions combined. While you were busy laughing, Victor, we were busy building the future." The crowd shifted. Murmurs rose. Several people craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the documents. Victor's smirk faltered. He tried to laugh it off. Paper means nothing until results are delivered. Daniel leaned closer, his voice lowering but carrying enough steel for everyone nearby to hear. "Results? We just closed a deal with the European Union for a continent-wide implementation. Our technology will power cities while Titan clings to outdated systems. The results are already here, Victor. You just don't have the eyes to see them." The same ballroom where Daniel had once been laughed at now fell silent. Investors who had come to worship Titan were suddenly recalculating. If Daniel's claims were true, then Nexitech was not just a competitor, it was the future. Victor's laugh came out forced this time. "You've grown bold, Carter. But don't forget, you're standing in my world. Without Titan's networks, you'll collapse eventually." Daniel straightened, no longer needing to prove himself with anger or desperation. "Your world, Victor, is shrinking. The future doesn't belong to those who cling to the past with arrogance. It belongs to those who innovate with vision and integrity." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Then came the twist. From the back of the room, Elena Ruiz, a renowned investor known for backing global ventures, stepped forward. "I've seen Daniel's work," she announced. "I've toured his facilities, spoken with his engineers. Titan may have dominated yesterday, but Nexitech owns tomorrow. And I, for one, am investing heavily." Gasps echoed. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled furiously. Victor's face reddened, his jaw tight. For the first time, he was no longer the man commanding the room. Daniel turned slightly, looking not just at Victor but at everyone. 2 years ago, I handed this man my card, and he laughed. He thought that by mocking me he ended my career. But sometimes, being underestimated is the greatest gift. It fueled me to build something no one could ignore. Tonight isn't about revenge, it's about proof. Proof that resilience and vision will always outlast arrogance and cruelty. The room erupted, not with laughter, but with applause. Victor tried to salvage his pride. Don't think this means you've won. Titan will crush you. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm words carried more weight than any threat. Victor, you can't crush the future. You can only delay it. And tonight, that delay ends. Victor stood frozen, his empire trembling under the weight of shifting loyalties. Investors who had once followed him unquestioningly now surrounded Daniel, eager to shake his hand. As the night wore on, Daniel left the ballroom, not drunk on triumph, but humbled by the journey. He thought of the nights spent working alone, the rejection emails, the ridicule, the endless grind. Every moment of struggle had led here. Outside, the city lights glittered. Daniel took a deep breath. He wasn't just the man who had been laughed at anymore. He was the man who had turned laughter into silence, silence into respect, and respect into power. And Victor Harrington? He was just another man who had mistaken cruelty for strength, and paid the price.